Hello. Welcome to the Hidden Center, where we wrestle with monsters, lions, and men. I'm your host, Dennis Damone, a lover of wisdom, words, and wonders. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of interviewing Jake Buscher from the channel Cutting the Gordian Knot. I've been listening to Jake's work for a while now and just love the way his mind works, that he sees these complex, difficult problems, the same ones that bother me, and he looks for that simple solution, seeing if we can just cut that darn Gordian knot rather than spending all of our time pulling apart the threads. Jake, I was wondering if you wanted to introduce yourself at all, anything you want to say to the listeners?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. That's really my only claim to internet fame, if you can call it fame, is the podcast floating out there. So that's exactly what we try to do. We try to find difficult, complicated topics, and there's many ways to go about untangling these or sorting these out, and many of them require massive amounts of wisdom, education, training, incredibly high IQs, and I lay claim to none of that. But what I do think is that I can offer some creativity. We dive into a lot of primary source documents. We rely on a lot of experts who know a lot more than I do. And we try to find those kind of unique ways to not just untangle things, but to cut through a little bit of the chaos. And I don't know if I'm always successful, but there's a few times which I kind of feel that heartwarming feeling of having made something a little bit more clear for the listeners. So,
Isn't that wonderful?
but glad to be on.
Well, I'm so glad that you came, because there are plenty of Gordian knots that bother me and bother lots of other people. There's one in particular that I wanted to speak with you about today, which is this growing rise in the broader American discourse, both in Christian circles and in non-Christian circles, of radical critiques of capitalism, of liberalism, of the social order as it is. You have critiques from the woke side of things. You have critiques from the even more radical left types who like their guns and maybe want a revolution. You have critiques from the right. You have critiques from Christian Nationalists. You have critiques from post-liberals. It's quite a mess. And you have been coming out regularly with critiques of the critiques, asking the tough questions of what are you actually going to replace there are problems, but what are you going to replace them with? And so I wanted to talk with you about these problems, and I think one of the best ways to start cutting through those Gordian knots is to ask the questions that people just sort of assume answers to. I don't know if you've noticed this, but everyone sort of has their assumptions that they bring to the table, and those assumptions are rarely touched.
Right.
So this is what Plato and Socrates fundamentally taught me, that if we're going to make progress, we need to ask those fundamental questions. And so I think that the fundamental question that's in the background of all these discussions of whether or not this system of economics or political theory leads to human flourishing, the background question is, what is human flourishing? In what circumstances, with what choices does the human being flourish? So I wanted to just ask you that what is question. What is human flourishing in your perspective?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Well, I mean, first we kind of have to talk about what a human is, and I'll follow Aristotle saying that we're a rational animal. And being a rational animal means that we have goods which pertain to our rationality and our animality. So with respect to our animality, one way to just answer that is, well, we need food and shelter and all these things. In the Politics, Aristotle says that a man who can live alone self-sufficiently is either a beast or a god. And I think that's fundamentally right. Either we just lower ourselves to the level of, well, you know what, I don't need a house, I don't need food, I'll just eat a pine cone, and you live like a beast. Or theoretically, he admits the idea that one could be so incredibly radically self-sufficient that we could transcend the level of the beast and we could live out our lives that way. But
Robinson Crusoe style.
Yeah. So in a sense, what do we need? Well, we need the ordinary things of life. And Aristotle and others say we actually get those not just from ourselves and our self-sufficiency and then things we can find in the environment, but we actually get it from each other. And that brings in this rationality. So rationality allows us to transcend only our animality, something that animals can participate in to a limited extent. And this allows us to plan for the future. It allows us to create networks with one another. It allows us to even you think about very abstract concepts, like we can design inventions or we can create financial derivatives. I mean, we can buy and sell the risk of something that hasn't happened yet. So we can
Wow.
use our rationality in union with our animality, in union with one another, in order to achieve goods we can't have by ourselves. So I would say one mode of human flourishing is the enjoyment of goods which we would want by ourselves, but we must access through a peaceful community whereby we help one another rationally.
Fascinating.
Is that too abstract? I don't know, but
No. We're all interested in the
I would start
abstractions here. We'll get
somewhere
concrete
around
eventually.
there.
So I think that's a wonderful place to start. So man is a rational animal. The later tradition will specify rational and social. Am I right about that?
I believe so. I don't know. I don't know.
One of the things that the listeners might not know is there's this wonderful, almost 2,000-year tradition of commentary on the Aristotelian texts, and so there's a lot of development that goes on with the original ideas that Aristotle puts forward to the time of Duns Scotus and the later scholastics at Salamanca. There's still Aristotelian commentaries being written, so it's an unbroken tradition for 2,000 years. And so from that tradition, they specify out rational implies social. So it's not just that we have these animal needs and desires, food, shelter, pleasures like sexuality, and the delight of good cooking. And it's not just that we have that animality and a rationality that allows us to figure out the appropriate means to the achievement of those animal goals, but we are also, because rational, social. This is, I think, encapsulated in the wonderful text of Genesis where God says of Adam, it is not good for man to be alone. There's something about human beings where we don't just want to know things and we don't just want to eat things. We want to share the food and the truth with others, sort of at a feast or a meal. And so I wonder if you have thoughts on that social aspect of man, that it's not just, would you agree that it's not just that we need to accumulate these goods rationally, but that we need to find an appropriate way of sharing them with each other?
Oh, absolutely. No, I like that you brought up that text because it kind of shows that theoretical man with all of the riches of the earth all by himself. And it's like, oh, there's still something missing. And it's exactly that. It's that social nature. Now, anybody who's ever had a friendship knows that it certainly shouldn't be exploitative. It shouldn't be predatory. Instead, it should be something where you, again, following Aristotle, our guy here, we view this person as another self. So goods which come to this person, what's the difference? It's like the good came to me, right? And then with a friend, we can find goods and gather around them. And then his perspective or her perspective and my perspective can all help us share in the appreciation and love of these good things. And that type of union of friendship through a common good creates a little community. So we can have communities of different scales, of different levels, whereby we see other people as other selves and we enjoy their goods, etc. So all this I kind of want to set up. It sounds very idyllic, but I do think it's something that we have experienced in our actual life, right?
Do you have experiences yourselves that would illuminate these abstract ideas? What are some of the deepest friendships that have meant so much to you?
So I have when I came into the Catholic Church, you get a sponsor and kind of guide and orient you going in. And my fellow was an incredible artist. He's a sculptor. He's done a lot of work in the Vatican. I know nothing about art. I am the least artistic human being. Like if I was a caveman and they went and saw like my cave drawings, they'd be like, that was proto-human, guys. That's proto-human. No humans here. But this guy has this incredible way of just envisioning the world in this beautiful. I don't have words because I'm not an artist. But he helps me actually take a different perspective on all the
Wow.
things in life, one that I've never been able to take before. And that makes me appreciate things. So it really opens up your eyes to good things when you have friends and friends who are different from you. What I
Mm.
kind of wanted to circle back to is something you kicked this off with, and something I don't think we give enough credit to. That is, there's a lot of people who are up for a radical upending of society that want to see this
Mm.
giant explosion. And the reason why I want us to start with talking about goods, talking about, you brought up flourishing, which is perfect, and talk about friendship and this idea that goods which redound to a friend are practically goods that redound to my benefit,
Yes, yes,
is
yes, yes.
because I absolutely want to affirm the impulse for a type of radical change, because here's
Mm.
why: it denotes a radical courage, and at its best, it doesn't assume one's place in the future society. Now, if you are
Wow.
assuming your place in the future society, then I think that's not a type of friendship. It can become predatory and exploitative. But if you're saying, hey, I want to get you guys excited about a radical change in society, and it's going to help society because I see society
Mm.
as a group of my friends. And if they
Wow.
benefit, I benefit. And guess what? If I fail, I'm up for the risk. Boy, do I want to
Beautiful.
affirm this. This is wonderful. It's to the distributists and socialists and hell, the communists and all these other people who say, I'm willing to change something that is at least we can say is working, right? We're not all starving to
Mm.
death. It's working because there might be something better on the other side for my
Mm.
friends. Oh, yeah,
Mm.
that's great. So I really don't want to just torpedo this impulse. I love this impulse, but I want to use this as an energy, as a drive. I don't want to diminish the courage, but I just want to specify these ends so that our friends can benefit. Aristotle
Beautiful.
says that what actually holds a polis together is
Mm.
friendship. Further, he
Wow.
says that where there is friendship, no law is required. So as friendship expands, as we enjoy the enjoyment of other people's enjoyment of other things, we don't need coercion. We don't need violence. This is so much better than trying to use the top-down violence to distribute goods out of envy and selfishness. I want the absolute opposite, and I want people to be excited to get there.
I love what you're saying, especially what you were saying there at the end about the temptation of using top-down authority to achieve proximate ends. It seems to me that the changes that actually last, and I wonder if you agree with this, come from those bonds of friendship.
Yeah, I think that's true most of the time.
Okay.
I don't really know. I'd really have to think about that. There are examples of horrendous long-term top-down oppression that just didn't quit. I think about like the Indian caste system. You know that
Mm.
when the people come down from the mountains and subjugate everybody, there's somebody there saying, I don't think this will be forever. And it was. Like, it's not forever, but it's hundreds of years of this. Or there is somebody who's dragging that last, giant block, with the help of the
Mm.
aliens, of course, to the top of the pyramids, thinking, all right, guys, we did it. We got the Sphinx. We got this. We got that pyramid. I'm sure we're done here. And then 1,500 more years of the Pharaoh's oppression over this poor people. In the time of St. Augustine, he talks about the plight of the Egyptians and
Mm.
talks about how their children run around without clothes. That they have a bunch of
Wow.
kids, they don't have clothes, many of them are starving, and that their standard of living is his example of just absolute poverty. And that persisted for a long, long time. So as much as I don't know whether I want to agree with that statement. I might say in our context, I might, or maybe I might specify it saying, well, friendship among Pharaoh and his compadres can keep a very stable thing going here. The goods of making pyramids and watching people run around naked apparently can certainly bind a ruling class together. So
That's
I
fair
don't know.
enough. This brings up the question then, what is friendship? I think do you know Aristotle's threefold distinction of different types of friendship?
Yeah, so he has, let's see if I can get it off the top of my head. So we have the highest level is a friendship of virtue, right? So we're gathering around something which is good. We're gathering around something which is perfective of ourselves and others. This is the peak, right? This is somebody who actually
Mm.
helps you towards becoming more fully made, perfected, or complete. Then we
Mm-hmm.
also have friendships of fun, if you will. This is the guy you invite over for a good time, and there's nothing wrong with that. And finally, we have those friendships of utility. Like I always give an example of I build houses for a living, and I had a realtor that I used for a long time in this one city, and we became friends. But it's not like we're like, hey, let's go for a picnic. It's like, no, no, no. We meet and we trust each other and we like each other and we are friends, but we're friends of utility. So
Right.
many types of friends belong in a polis. Ideally, we're going to have a couple of those friendships of virtue. Aristotle says you're lucky to have 2 or 3 ever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a rare, rare thing to actually have that true friendship of virtue. And when I first read that, I was like, well, that can't be right. I have tons of friends. And then I slowly
Right?
started examining them. I'm like, oh, I guess we just kind of enjoy being around each other. We're not truly seeking the highest goods together. But one of the key principles that I got from my philosophy education was that the higher does not negate the lower. And so the fact that there should be these friendships of virtue does not negate the fact that it is good to have friendships of utility and of enjoyment. So that brings up the question then, since we're talking about economics and about fundamental changes, do you think then that the fundamental way that we should interact with our fellow economic agents is through that friendship of utility? Or put it another way, is it ever legitimate to interact with another economic agent without some form of friendship of utility? Some sort of...
Ooh,
Does that make sense of the question?
that's a great question. That's a great question. I don't think they're necessarily competitive, these modes of friendship in a market. Let me just give you an example.
Okay.
So I'm building a house right now. Well, not right now. I'm podcasting or YouTubing or whatever I'm doing right now. You can't see my hands. Maybe I'm building a house. But let's say I'm at work, and I really do try to do a good job. Doesn't always happen. I hope the new buyers don't hear the bad, but I try to do a good job. And there's certain virtues in working hard, in bring it back to kind of the Aristotelian, what is it, the virtue of magnificence, to make something great, right? So you make a
Yes,
great
yes,
thing,
yes,
right?
yes.
So I am exercising at my best a virtue of magnificence to make something wonderful, right? So
Mm,
that means that when somebody comes and says, when there's a market for buying houses, this sets the prereqs for me being able to make a house that I can
right,
sell.
right.
And the richer society is, the more magnificent the house I will sell you. So this sets the stage for my virtue, right? And
Mm,
then they come to me, and I am a friend of utility. I am offering them something which is densely practical. And
right.
also, we have that last bit where it's not just that I'm a fun guy, we'll have like a nail gun shooting contest, but it's that I'm offering you something fun, something beautiful,
Yeah,
something likable. So I don't think these are competitive in the market. If anything, they actually kind of converge in a market because we're
that's
caring for
beautiful.
one another rationally, with expectations of the future, with regard to our animal needs, in a way that's densely utilitarian, but
Mm,
actually allows us to execute virtues and at the highest level and be rewarded for them over the long term if we have a fair system.
gotcha. So we began this conversation by talking about human flourishing, and we've sort of landed on friendships of various sorts as the locus of much of human flourishing. Certainly, Aristotle would agree with that, and the later tradition that came after him most certainly does. Do you think then that the free market, that the system that we have, well, I shouldn't say the system that we have set up right now because it's not exactly clear that we're in a free market, but let's go at the theoretical level first and then we can talk about practicalities later. Do you think that the free market is the best place, the best locus to cultivate those hierarchically ordered friendships?
Yes. Next question. No, I'm kidding.
What
No,
makes it the optimal place for human flourishing? What makes the free market the optimal place?
sure. Well, I wouldn't say the free market is the optimal place, but for certain ends, it would be the optimal place for human flourishing.
Okay.
I believe we have ends which are entailed by our rationality. Being a Catholic, I believe we actually need friendship with God. So that's this
Mm,
whole other order. But we're kind of talking about friendship with neighbor. And
sure.
amongst friendship of neighbor, well, then it is a very important piece. Let me give you an example of how we've all experienced friendship in the markets. Right?
Go for it.
Um, what's the most exciting thing that you've purchased recently?
Oh boy.
It doesn't have to be terribly exciting. It could be.
No, well, actually, so I just paid my sister to paint this wonderful image for the show for us, and so that was quite a pretty penny, and it was pretty exciting to buy.
And did you say thank you at the end of the transaction?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Of course. Did she, when you gave her money?
She was not only for the money, but for the project. She found it enjoyable to work together on something.
Fascinating. I suggest that the reason why we commonly, if not always, say thank you at the end of a voluntary free market transaction is because we're thankful to the other. It's a very simple theory, which is highly predictive. But isn't that a fascinating thing that we need to stop and think about? I say thank you to somebody that I just paid money to. Why? Now, if I had it by right, would I say thank you? There was a property dispute at one house I was making, and there was a question about where the boundary line was. Now, once it's determined, does the one person say, "Hey, thank you"? No, you don't say hey, thank you. You say, "You were on my side of the line, and now you're on your side of the line. This was mine all along," right? You don't say thank you when you have a right to something, and that's it. And that's it. And you demand something from that person, and it's just yours, and that's it. No. It's something else going on. And economically speaking, when we engage in these voluntary transactions, the only time where we do so without like fraud or something is when I believe it'll benefit you, you believe it'll benefit me. And there's two things which go on here. One, if we're going to draw the little graph back here, we have our supply and we have our demand, and we have that little triangle, and then the line goes across the triangle, we have profit. And then the least talked about thing ever, consumer surplus. So you can almost think about this as like profit for the other side. So if I sell you a gigantic bag of marshmallows and I make $2 in profit, I go, "Hey, thank you." What am I thanking you for? Just the fact that your what is $2 matches my marshmallows? No, I'm thanking you for the part that doesn't. I'm thanking you, in a sense, for the amount that goes over and above. I'm thanking you for the profit, and that's why I'm excited about the transaction. Why do you thank me? Well, he didn't tell me this, but he really likes marshmallows, and he would have paid $4 for that $2 bag of marshmallows. So he has the secret reserve price. I would have paid $4 for those marshmallows. I love marshmallows. And I say, "Dude, I'll give them to you for $2." And now you have $2 in consumer surplus. So what do you say thank you about? You say thank you about that. Because if you begrudgingly go, "Man, this is just barely it. Like, $2 marshmallows, not much. Take your money." You say thank you because you gained $2. So that's why I think markets are unique, right? When we say, "Hey, we're going to make a voucher system, a stamp system, and you can stand in the line and you can get your bread at the end of the line," you say, "I have a stamp. This is my claim. Give this to me. It is my property. The government has decreed that the boundary line goes me and my bread, you with no bread anymore. Here's your stamp, and now that's on your side of the boundary line, and let's frown about it." So I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but that's an answer.
It's very helpful and very evocative. I like what you're saying about this is a theme that an economist friend of mine, Dr. Scott, has repeatedly made to me, that a free exchange is one in which both parties benefit. And it makes me think of one of my favorite places, one of my favorite markets on the earth, which is a coffee shop. When I go to a coffee shop, the coffee and the donuts and the pastries are way too expensive. More than I, in any sane part of my brain, would ever pay for coffee or pastries. But I'm not just paying for the coffee and pastries. I'm paying for the beautiful environment, for like all the work that goes into keeping the lights on, that goes into putting the arts on the wall, that like cleaning the floors, and just creating an atmosphere in which I can read and think and encounter people. I've made so many friends just by frequenting coffee shops over and over again. You discover who the regulars are. And so I always know there are friends of mine who will go to a coffee shop and secretly like sort of sit there and not buy anything. And I always say, "No, I think you're doing an injustice. you ought to pay those extra large prices so that you can keep the lights on at this place that is blessing you so much.
Yeah, and engaging in those kind of interactions, I think, kind of getting back to what we were talking about earlier, what is a mode of human flourishing? I think we're actually made to work, and if we don't work, we get sad. And what that says is, well, if we're made to work, it's not just made to work and consume ourselves, because we already discussed how when we create a good thing, it's actually better with the enjoyment of others. So we're actually made to work, made to make good things, and made to make other people happy with those good things, because that makes us even happier. So having a market allows us to be able to optimally work and then optimally send these things out to the people who say, I'm putting my hand up first because I like this coffee shop the most. The people who like it the most are the people who are going to come the most often, are going to become the regulars. And that means this is the exact group that has assembled to share in the goodness of your labor as somebody who makes coffee. That is wonderful. We like this.
It is.
This is something worth preserving. Now, I'm more than happy about talking about how things can go wrong here and how the consumer surplus, producer surplus split can be warped through different types of taxes or through monopolization of either the group of buyers or the groups of sellers.
Oh, interesting.
Sure. And these are real issues that deserve real attention, but we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I have a baby. I know this for a fact now. And
that bathwater can get pretty dirty.
The bathwater can. Indeed it can. Sometimes you have to change it a few times, but this is something we need to preserve. These good parts that target friendship, that target flourishing, which actually set the precondition for our exercise of a variety of virtues. All of this is good. Now let's take that revolutionary, courageous attitude whereby we could incur a loss to make society better. And that type of bravery and courage, when paired with a selflessness, is wonderfully constructive. Bravery and courage, which is paired with a selfishness, is unbelievably dangerous. And not only is it dangerous
sorry to interrupt, but this is something that you and I both appreciate, the work of the popes of the Catholic Church over the last 200 years, who have been making subtle but significant critiques of the societies that we live in and of the revolutionary spirit. The one of the fundamental themes I've seen in those works is that even when we have to bring about significant changes in a system, we ought to presume friendship between the rulers and the ruled, between the rich and the poor. We can't treat them as if they're natural enemies.
100 and bazillion percent. There's there's a section in Proverbs and another one in James, which both say the same thing about envy. And I think it's really illuminating. One, it says that it's a rottenness of the bones. I think that's interesting. The other one I think is more interesting. In James, it says it is a bone cancer. So why is it that it's saying envy is this bone cancer? In one case, it actually damages you. So we can imagine this body as an individual. When you are struck with envy, this makes you brittle in your life. So if you are consumed with, oh no, other people are enjoying good things and this causes me actual distress, then your life will be brittle and fragile. Your mental health will be brittle and it will be fragile. I can guarantee you this is a mode of living an effective life, 100%, but it extends to the body politic. And in those two ways, when you have envy come into a society, it actually undermines the foundation of society. And interestingly, the book of James kind of clarifies in a bone cancer-like way. Bone cancer targets the marrow, and the marrow is what produces blood. And what does blood do? It is that which is responsible for the active transport of resources. So I love this. I don't know if he intended this, but I think that is a very apt description of what envy does. When we get envy in society, what ends up is that the society itself can crumble because it's targeting, destroying, and perverting the processes by which we actively transport resources through the body politic. So
Wow.
when we undo that, we have a hell. I'm talking about in my revolutionary world, if you will, let's dispense with envy. Let's embrace
Mm.
friendship. And then as friends, let's look at issues together so that you can
Mm.
benefit, I can benefit, society can benefit, and let's use our courage not just to attack one another or to turn inward in self-destruction, but instead let's actually use it to solve real problems. Wouldn't that be great?
Fascinating. One of the things that I love about these choice scripture quotes and references to popes and Christian thinkers is that they're just kind of wise. You don't have to be a believer yourself to recognize that a lot of wisdom is encapsulated in a visceral metaphor like envy is a bone cancer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm just loving how this conversation keeps on circling around the question of friendship. And this really raises the question for me, not just what social theory leads to flourishing of friendships, including those friendships of utility that you and I both think are absolutely necessary, but what specific institutions within a society, within a framework, actually encourage the flourishing of friendship. So we took the example of the coffee
Perfect.
shop
Yeah.
earlier, or the farmers market, which there's a local farmers market that I love going to. I have relationships with several of the people who do the market. Like, hey, how's it going today? Have you sold enough sandwiches today, or did you put a little extra spice in that one today? It's just you develop a human bond. I'm not going to go get pie with this person. I'm not going to go worship with this person, but I will absolutely fork over my $10 to help them keep their business running
Sure.
because I love the thing that they give me. The one of the huge questions that arises for me, though, is if the structures that we've become so used to in what the critics call late-stage capitalism. I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that term, but let's just use the language. It's the property of the wise man not to care about words. So it refers to something.
Amen.
And so in late-stage capitalism, we have all these structures in place, contracts, internet transactions, highways, buses, trucks, train systems, shipments from across the world that could strike one as replacements for friendship. You don't have to be my friend if we have a contract. I don't have to know anything about you if I purchase your product off of Amazon. Do you think that these social forms encourage the flourishing of friendship, or are they in some way destructive of the kind of friendship that you have at a coffee shop?
Right. Well, I think they can be destructive if they came to replace a friendship, but I think they're constructive if they come to replace distrust or animosity. So
Okay.
there's a real sense in which if I could yell thank you all the way to mainland China for the people who just sent me whatever I just ordered on Amazon, I would do it. And for that reason we
Yeah.
talked about earlier, they benefited me, I benefited them. We would like to thank each other. Now, if there
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a third party like Amazon and then all these other types of middlemen along the way securing things with contract and having trust, then we can't build up that reliable history of good transactions. If you look at, say, the website Alibaba, there's a bunch of sellers which will sell you something cheaper, but you don't know if they've ever sent a package and if these reviews are real. It's like this mistrust makes me be on my
Right.
guard. And they're going to say, well, is
Right.
he really going to pay me? So now they're on their guard. So when we have these like trusted third parties, when we have these strong laws, when we have these contracts, then this actually makes it easy to act with virtue as a default. And as we
Fascinating.
have these structures and laws, and it can include contracts which habituate us to virtue. And that's what contracts do. It says you have to be habituated to doing what you said you would.
Mm.
Then this
Mm.
law is a teacher. Law is a teacher and law is a tool.
Fascinating.
So this tool tries to snip off transactions which are harmful and actually hurt friendship. They make enemies out of people. And it tries to prune society such that it's just a flourishing tree, which hopefully can actually drop away contracts. And friendship
Wow.
is the other
Interesting.
side of that. an example I like is the Jewish diamond trade, where
Okay.
they'll do multi-million-dollar like handshake deals, saying, "Hey, this is so many S1. There's a small inclusion here. This one's so many
Huh.
carats," and they don't weigh it out and they don't check every one. They go, I trust you because we're friends. We're part of the same community. And they can just destroy everybody else on this, not because they're cheating, but because they're trusting. They can do it
Mm.
because their transaction costs are goose egg. They can steal it with a high five, right? And
Wow.
nobody else
Wow.
can. So it replaces those types of institutions, replace bad stuff, train us towards virtue, and allow us to have even that scaffolding drop away. And you
Wow.
brought up scripture. It's a very similar arc to scripture. It says, everybody's bad as the default, right? It starts out. And then it says, and then we bring in law as this tool and teacher to cultivate
Mm.
virtue. All right, cool. And then that starts to drop away later, not because the tool was bad or the teacher was false. It wasn't. But because it started to inculcate virtues into this people with the help of grace, et cetera, et cetera. But
Mm.
now we can live without it, right? So it's this
Mm.
transition from one to another. So no, I
That's
don't think
wonderful.
so.
That's so fascinating. You're making me think of two stories from my life that illuminate two of the points you made. So I have several friends who moved to the States from Africa. My grandparents are very generous and like to host foreign exchange students, so I got to know several of these people. And when one of them moved to the States, he needed to get his driver's license in the States. And so my grandmother drives him to the DMV, and he's all nervous about going into the DMV. She doesn't quite know why. To her, the DMV is just a boring place. They go in, they walk in, they pay their money, they go out, and he has his driver's license in hand, and he's staring at it in shock. And she says, what's the big deal? And he says, in my country, this would have taken months. So, well, what do you mean? She says, well, first you have to pay the first guy a little extra. And then you have to pay the guy that he reports to a little extra. And then you have to come back 2 weeks later and they'll ask you for a little bit more. And then you come back a month later and maybe, if you're lucky, if you pay even a little bit more, you'll get your driver's license.
Wow.
And so he lived in a culture where there was not this fundamental trust that contracts would be honored and that corruption would be largely dealt with. So he didn't have trust with institutions. It was quite a shock for him to adjust to American society where you can basically trust most institutions. That's debated more and more in the post-COVID world and also in the post-9/11 world. Honestly, going all the way back to the Vietnam War, our trust in institutions has been shaken at the top. But at the bottom, we still trust that the DMV guy is not going to shake us down.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. There's a, where am I going with this? I don't know. Anyways, back
No
to you.
worries. But there was another story that you reminded of that might be worth sharing, which is I was talking with some friends recently who are salesmen for an adult diaper company.
Ah, okay.
It's a funny thing to working for, but it's a privately owned institution, and the company really cares about the quality of their product because if their product fails, someone is going to have a very awkward day.
Indeed.
And so I love any institution where the people involved genuinely care about the quality of what they're making. I think this is the virtue of the majority of our lives. There was someone who said, if you're a preacher in a pulpit and you're talking to working men, the fundamental thing you should tell them is do your job well, make a good product. And that always struck me as fundamentally true. But I was talking with this salesman, and he was saying, I find myself making a defense of capitalism because capitalism, in his mind, was about relationships. He's told me that if you get into sales at all, there will be tons of people trying to teach you how to do sales. And the people you don't want to listen to are the people who are telling you how to make a quick buck and then get out.
Right.
There's a lot of turnover in sales. You come to one company, you make a big buck, you lose everything, you go somewhere else. But the places you want to stay are the places and the people who teach you how to build relationships. He's said the number of times that I've gone into a meeting and I've told the person that I'm talking to, look, I love what you're doing. We want to work with you, but best I can tell, our product actually won't serve your needs. he's honest. He tells them, I want to have a relationship with you in so many words. And then those people tell their friends, these guys are honest. And so he then gets tons of sales from referrals from people he told would not be a good match for their company.
Perfect. Yeah, it's funny. You actually jogged what I was thinking of there. So I'm glad you brought up sales. When we think institutions are dishonest, it makes us want to be dishonest. So bad salespeople, if you ever see like training to sell, I don't know, timeshares or something, or used cars, there's a very common tactic. You come up to all these new recruits and you say, customers lie. And they go, no. And you say, you think the customers don't. And that's a sweet little fantasy you have. You're very naive, but I got to break something to you. Customers lie. They lie all the time. And people say, well, I don't want to say no, customers are truthful because now I'm going to seem naive. And now everybody's kind of laughing like, yeah, okay, yeah. And now they go along with it. And now they kind of have this idea that, well, customers are dishonest. So if you think the counterparty is dishonest, what are you more open to doing? Lying. So now we have this dynamic where we've broken off friendship entirely, and we have people only turning inward. Say, I'm going to just extract. And now the other person extracts. It's like the prisoner's dilemma problem, right? If they both cooperate, they both win. If they both don't cooperate, everything goes crazy, right? They think, well, this other person's going to get me, so I'll get them first. So when we break into that, like, equilibrium where everybody's failing in the prisoner's dilemma, then boy, society's not going to flourish. So yeah, that's a very scary thing. When we, there's good reason to distrust lots of institutions, but I think that we ought to do kind of a tit for tat program, which seems to be most effective with prisoner's dilemma type solutions, or where you simply say, if somebody wrongs me, yes, you can punish them back. And then you say, hey, let's get back in the game. Let's try this again. So if somebody does you wrong, you can say, hey, there is a consequence. Maybe I'm not going to buy from you next time. But you can come back to them and say, hey, you failed me last time. Come back. I want to try this again. You got to be honest with me. And then we can actually be taking people from being enemies to being friends.
Fascinating stuff. You're making me think about the work of the Polish philosopher Karol Wojtyła, who has really influenced me. I have one of his texts right here with me. I wanted to come prepared to a conversation like this. I didn't want to be just presenting my own thoughts, but to dialogue with some of the greats, as you so often do on your own channel. So one of the things that Karol Wojtyła points out in the question of capitalism, and the question of this free market system, is that there are certain dangers, certain threats to the friendship that we've been talking about so much. The main one that he points out, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about this, is that a central temptation of the capitalist is that men, the workers, would be treated as an instrument of production. So the Karol Wojtyła's central theme, the thing that he's most taught me, is the inviolable dignity of the person. Totally. That each person, a person is the kind of being to whom the only proper, just response is love or friendship. Sure. And so my dad tells this story of one time right out of college, he worked at a telemarketer institution, and it became very clear to him from the way his boss treated him that he was just a cog in the wheel. He had no dignity to this owner, and he could be replaced at a moment with another wage slave to be maybe even paid less than he was being paid, and so his job was always on the line. Sure. And I've experienced this myself. I've worked at grocery stores, big chains, where a lot of the people on the ground treat me like a person, but the higher up in management you go, the more I become a cog in the wheel to their eyes. And so do you think that this is a danger inherent in a free market system, that we're often going to be tempted by the dynamism of the market to treat our fellow men as cogs in the wheel, as people as means to the end of production?
Yeah, I think that's a great critique and one we need to take seriously. But we always have to ask, we're going to ask a couple questions here. One is compared to what? Right. So if we have, instead of individual, which everybody who likes economics just needs to get a tattoo of, compared to what? So that's the first question is, well, okay, if we allow everybody to individually decide whether they want to consume or produce a given amount of labor or a given amount of capital, et cetera. So if we push all of the decision making down to the individual, would that cause less of this problem than if we denied decision making to some people and allowed other people to pursue their plans with other people as a means? So if we say, we're just going to nationalize this industry and then make compulsory certain purchases and sales, well, then we're actually forcing other people into labor. It's a type of forced labor whereby this problem's multiplied. That's the first point. We have to think carefully about compared to what. The
Well
next
said.
point is, I really do encourage people to just quit. And I mean this with all of my heart. There's this idea that we commonly have types of loyalty to companies that we have, and that can be great. But loyalty must be earned. It's something that's a reward for acting virtuously. And if we let that not happen, and we're actually distorting the market, because what the market gives us when we go to work is not just wages. That is absolutely false. Your compensation comes as a package. There are places where you can go to work and have a great day every day, and it's easy and it's fun and it's wonderful, and it doesn't pay well. And hey, you can park easily and maybe you get free food. There are these places, and they're very competitive for some people in some situations. Other people say, no, I'm willing to go and mine coal or something. I want more money and worse working conditions. I'll make that trade. So we need to be very open to saying, if I'm not treated well, come up to your superior and saying, hey, this is honesty. This is courage. Come up and say, hey, you spoke to me in this way. I don't think that was respectful. I understand, like, you're my boss, and if you ask me to do this task, I will do it, and I'm happy to do it, but I don't want you to take that tone with me. And they'll go, most of them will say, okay. They didn't think of it. Confront them with that. And if they do it again, say, hey, boss, I'm happy to do this task. I show up every day. I work incredibly hard here, but you're still just speaking like that to me, and I'm not all right with that. I will leave. Like, I'm happy to be the best worker here, and we should all try to do that. But if you're not going to treat me with respect, I am going to leave. And that's a message we need to deliver this. No quiet quitting. I want people to stand up to their boss, stand up to people and say, yes, clarify quitting, not clarify why you're quitting, and then execute it. Leave and go to a competitor if that's where your skill set will be better valued, and say, hi, these are the references from the people I worked with, maybe with my immediate supervisor. They say I worked incredibly hard, and I'm here to do exactly that for you. And then go make that place a success and drive the other one to the ground. Or, if you can, strike out on your own. In my industry, building houses, there are so many grumpy, alcoholic, white-haired men who scream at their apprentices, and they make terrible, awful, abusive working environments. And I am more than willing to create a wonderful environment for people. And we can have fun and we can work and everybody is respected. And I want to drive them out of business. I want them in poverty. That's what I want to do. I want to take the entire market. And guess what? People would rather work for people who give them a higher total compensation. And compensation comes in more ways than wages. So if I can pay you something free in the form of respect and dignity, then you'll not only outwork somebody who doesn't have that, but heck, I could get people who might be in a situation where they don't require as high a wages. Now my costs are lower, my profits are higher, I can expand, and you're going to fail. That's my first point, is that quit, go out on your own, always be an exemplary worker, because if you aren't working as hard as you can and being virtuous, then your whining about how you're treated will fall on deaf ears. Be the model employee, stand up to your boss and say, this is not how I'm going to be treated. Be willing to go out on your own. Be willing to go to a competitor. This is how the market works. We talk about price signaling, and that's true, and it's incredibly efficient, and it forms wonderful, amazing institutions to use resources. Well, there's a price of your labor that comes in the form of dignity and respect, and you ought to respond to this price signal. And if you do, Research shows only 10% of people in a given market need to be price sensitive to drive the price to somewhere near what we would expect as equilibrium. So we just need 10% of people being hardworking, virtuous, and honest to be able to help solve this problem. This is on us, all right? So take that.
Okay.
The other part I want to talk to is I want to back up to the very beginning of your question where you talk about how we're using these people as a means to an end. And specifically, we're using their labor as a means to an end to just kind of get this extra bonus for us by piggybacking on their labor. If you have capital that was accrued by somebody and has been saved in some way and represents somewhere somebody's labor on something. So this is capital is simply old labor, and labor is new labor. So we have to respect everybody's labor. It's wrong to just disregard or not value current labor, and it's wrong to do the same for the old. So I could tell a story. We always hear one story that the big bad person who has, say, the factory is exploiting the workers. Why can't I say the opposite story? Because guess what? If we shutter the factory, if we lock all the doors and we say, go make a living, they're not going to make as much money, which means this excess money that they make over and above what they would have done without capital is in reference to the capital they're using. Why they're exploiting the person with the factory to make wages over and above what they could have made by themselves without any productive assets. So I say we stop using the lens of envy where we're saying who's screwing who. You're a lying customer. You're a lying salesperson. We say, no. We need one another. You have capital. I have labor. When I work with your capital, I make a higher wage. When you get to employ me as a worker, your capital is worth more. So we're both benefiting. Let's freely, with our eyes open, engage in a trade. I don't want you buying marshmallows if you think my marshmallows are crap. And guess what? I don't want you selling your labor to an employer if you think that the marshmallows he gives you in return are crap. So make the market work better and respond to the full compensation package, including human dignity.
So I loved the example that you gave of the situation in construction. I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I have 3 years of construction experience under my belt.
Hey!
I've been building houses, same as you. I worked with the Amish for a bit, actually, which was a lot of fun.
Fantastic.
They're very hard workers and very honest. They would rather take a hit than go to court with someone if they can take the hit, which is, I think, a beautiful example of like we're going to be honest even if people aren't honest with us.
Awesome.
But so they were great bosses, the Amish. My first introduction to construction, we might have to bleep this out later, but I would walk into the morning and one of my immediate supervisors would welcome me with "Good morning, sugar tits."
Nice. Okay.
that was his way of saying howdy. So I've experienced both ends of the spectrum, and working for an honest laborer working for someone who owns capital and can put me to good work is one of the happiest experiences that I've had. So working for the Amish was an absolute delight. My first construction job, not so much a delight. Got out as quick as I could. But that's the thing. Getting out as quick as you can is the proper response to unjust treatment, and it does take courage to do so. I'm curious, though, if you've read some of the books that came out of the early 1900s, like the novels, like The Grapes of Wrath or The Jungle, sort of famous tracts from this time period. I read them in high school, and they left a fundamental impression on me. The Jungle explicitly argues for communism and socialism, and I didn't follow the author down that rabbit hole. But he raised questions that I've been looking for answers to ever since. And the same with Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, another great early American author. I don't know about early 1900s, great author. He argues for a kind of secular atheistic humanism, but with compassion at the center. So there's still a lot to learn from both, but as I said, I'm more interested in the questions they answer, which is that they portray this world in which the poor don't have anywhere to go. So they start out, the main characters all start out Well, first, in the Grapes of Wrath, they lose their family farm due to the Dust Bowl. And the Dust Bowl, if I recall correctly, was caused by both by bad farming practices and I think by early industrialization, unless I'm mistaken. So the effects of some capitalists not carefully considering how they used their capital led to the disenfranchisement, the end of the family farms of thousands of Americans. And so these thousands of Americans become indigents traveling across the land looking for work. They're in a very vulnerable position. Again, Karol Wojtyła, the philosopher I referenced earlier, he says somewhere that something to the effect that the way a nation treats its poor is an index of the health of its whole economy. And I think that's accurate. And so what you see in the early 1900s, at the very least, and arguably there are still some patterns like this present, perhaps in America, but certainly in countries that America makes use of the products of, is that the poor have nowhere to go. Mm-hmm. If they quit the one job, they end up working for the friend of the guy that they were just working for who treats them the same way. If they quit, there are 1,000 people looking for their job, willing to take unjust wages. Now, this is the thing that I think is sometimes missed, is that many people, the capitalism judges a transaction on whether or not it was free. But people will freely accept insufficient wages, money that won't actually give them a living wage, won't enable them to provide for their family, because a little is better than nothing. And so because of that human tendency of being willing to, that some is better than none, systems of injustice, of incredible injustice, can last for a very long time, as you pointed out with the case of the Egyptians at the beginning of our story, of our conversation, but, kind of a story.
Sure.
So what I'm trying to set up here, and we might wind down with this question, is: do you see forms of that kind of institutional injustice in which courageous people who are willing to stand up to the powers that be, who are willing to say, I am being treated unfairly in this job, are put in a situation where they have nowhere to go, where they can't find a place that will treat them well, and as such, they are encouraged by large systemic forces to accept unjust treatment because some is better than none when it comes to wages?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there. So let's unpack
Take your
it
time.
all.
Take your time.
So
Please
I might
do.
have to go through a little bit of setup. First, Adam Smith argues in The Wealth of Nations. He talks about something, he may have even called it a fair wage, and he means the amount that would support, the working person and them in a family, such that there can be more working people. And to my memory, what he grounds this on is not morality even. He says, listen, guys, it's just pure practicality, because if you don't pay them enough to live, they die. And if they die, then supply contracts. And if supply contracts, the price goes up, and now you're paying more. And now this can persist for an entire generation until they have enough money to now have families, which point there's more workers, and now supply shifts, and now the price drops again. So do you want to play this game, or do you want to just pay people enough so that they could reliably, sustainably work, and now we don't have giant vacillations in the price of labor? So he actually argues on a practical ground. So if you don't want to take like this, Catholic social teaching, scriptural more, just take a practical method of saying, well, just over the long term in any given area, this just needs to be the dynamic. Now, where I can get off the bus is what actually counts as the standard. I mean, if you look back at the Roman Empire, like at its height, it's equivalent to like $660 a year today. And the fact is, through the large sweep of human history, and they didn't have they couldn't spend that on very cool things. It's not like they could save up for an iPad. No, I mean, this was like, I got some wheat. That's cool. So we got to kind of have a longer term perspective of what it looks like to have enough money to support a family. We really continually index it higher and higher and higher and higher. And I mean, particularly in the US, it's not just that we index our expectation, but we sometimes index this in law, or we do other really dumb regulations which don't allow people to even access what would have been a perfectly fine life, but isn't today. I mean, In Russia, currently, I believe it's the majority of people don't have indoor plumbing. In America today, if you don't have indoor plumbing, your house is unfit and your children will be taken away. Now, maybe that's reasonable, maybe that's not, but we got to say that's clearly a legal thing where we said you can't possibly have less than this. You're not allowed. Or we
Wow,
have
wow,
minimum
wow.
sizes for houses. So one thing I want to do is step back and say, let's allow for people to be able to access goods which are cheap enough, to be able to live at a standard which probably our grandparents lived at. Let's face it. And let's make that something that's even on the table. The next thing I want to say is we fundamentally misunderstand who these people are. We view them as victims and not heroes. And that's a problem. And some of these people might fundamentally misunderstand themselves. If they're in a situation where it's not that they're being it's not that people are just being mean to them and taking away their money, but it's actually that their ability to earn is low enough that their standard of living, consequently, is not all that high. And they have taken the best possible opportunity for them to take care of themselves and their families. And they are valiantly working and fighting to care for these people. These people are heroes. If you have a grandfather, a great grandfather who went every day into a coal mine, sometimes their commute was literally going through a shaft. And they did that so that you're here today, so that your grandparents are here today. That is an incredible sacrifice, not one they did in one day, but one that they did over years. These are heroes. And guess what? We need to allow heroes to be in other countries too. The people who go into those manufacturing facilities do it because they believe that's a better option than what they were doing otherwise. And yeah, it's hard. And guess what? At that time, in that place, in that market, the standard of living isn't high yet. But the solution isn't just to say we're going to wave our magic wand and make their lives better. The solution is we need to have a thriving economy that is dynamic enough to absorb all the excess labor now. Because the problem you're describing is an oversupply of labor. And I think the way to solve that is not to kill them off and let them starve, hashtag Soviet Union. It's not to wave a magical wand and say they should be better off. That's useless. It's let's have a dynamic, thriving market that says all hands on deck because there's many ways to serve your neighbor now. Let's bring in more factories so they're not only bargaining with one. I want Nike there and I want Adidas there. And I want everybody else coming in and saying, let's soak up this low priced labor fast. And I want the laborers to say, we're going to make your stuff as hard as we can because we actually have an impelling love. We're not being like drawn forward with like the whip of destitution. I want them to be pushing forward out of love for their families, out of love for their friends, out of love for their community. I think they should see themselves as heroes and not victims. And we need to enable that by allowing competition for their labor to allow it to go up in price. And I told you there was a lot here. Let me just name one more thing.
Please take your time. I'm loving this.
Reflecting on Rerum Novarum that we brought up, it says something unbelievably common sense, and that is there's an upper limit to one's wages. The upper limit to one's wages is one's productivity. And this is very simple. We say, if you are a potato farmer and you farm 4 potatoes a day, how many potatoes is the most we can give our potato farming friends? Well, 4 would be the maximum, and we don't have enough potatoes to now expand their field or invest in anything. So that's the upper limit. Now,
Just
if they
to
worked
pause
harder,
you for a second, for anyone who doesn't know, what is Rerum Novarum?
Rerum Novarum is a papal encyclical that maybe we didn't reference earlier. I don't know.
We referenced the popes, but not
this
this one specifically.
So it is the granddaddy of Catholic social teaching, of which all other Catholic social teaching documents that I know of reference. So it's kind of the basis. If you're going to do a one-stop shop, what the church means, if you want to consult that, then that's what I would suggest. And you can always go through the 6-part series on my podcast where I do a line-by-line commentary.
There we go.
A wonderful way to do. So I like that very common sense view that the upper limit to wages is set by the productivity of the laborer. we always ask, why do poor people not earn enough? And we're thinking only just in nominal wages. The question which I think would help those people, help all of society, is why are poor people not productive enough such that people want to employ them so that they can trade the fruits of their labor for things which we would recognize as a good life? That's the question I want to ask. And we don't make them more productive by refusing them the capital resources to employ. We talked about earlier how you can almost tell the same story about exploitation going the other way. These laborers are exploiting these capitalists, using their facility in order to generate wages over and above what they could have made otherwise. Or we just drop the exploitation language entirely and say we could talk about this as a cooperation, because if it's free, it is cooperation. And let's allow them to have things which make them more productive. And hey, if you don't want this strictly to be from capitalism, I'm all for it. If you want to make a nonprofit or a charity organization, or if you just want to pack your bags and go to, I don't know, Thailand and teach orphans how to do math and read, and teach them critical thinking skills, and teach them trades and technical stuff, increase their human capital, do it. If you wanted to, I don't know, fund the dredging of a deep sea port over in a third world nation so that they can have unencumbered access to the massive fruits of international trade, cool, man. I love it. But the market's going to do this. And I think that we shouldn't oppose it. We should support it. And we absolutely need a market strong enough to absorb excess labor. And I think even people who might disagree with us ideologically, who might lean more socialist, at least accept that markets are good at growth. Sometimes they actually object that it's so good at growth it gobbles up all the resources. So you can't have it both ways. If capitalism has such crazy unencumbered growth that it gobbles up all of the natural resources, then how is it doing that by not gobbling up, say, the human resources? And if it is gobbling up these human resources like some unencumbered monster, maybe we should put the monster to good use and gobble up the excess labor that causes people to have terribly low wages.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for sharing all that. There's so many questions that I could ask you. I do want to be moving towards winding down, but if I ever have the opportunity to have you back on, I would like to press you a little bit more on the question of unjust systems.
Like, cool. Let's do it. Let's open it up. I got the time, man.
Let's look into this another time. I would really enjoy doing so, because it does seem to me that with all the good things that you pointed out about capitalism, and I'm happy to grant that these are good things, there is still an objective question that has to be asked looking at the history of capitalism and how it's shaken out over the course of 200, 300, maybe 400 years. I'm not sure when we want to put the starting point. Has it tended to produce systems in which the poor, the virtuous poor, have nowhere to go to find just treatment? That's a question that I think would be worth pressing into a little bit more. So seeding that for another time. Before we go, we are going to do another half an hour interview looking at where you find your center, where you find happiness in life and how you found it. But before we go, I just wanted to ask if there's one book that you would recommend to people, not necessarily on the topics that we've covered today, but just a book that's changed your life. What's a book that you would recommend to our listeners today?
Oh, my word. There's so many. I guess very early on, I found two books which seemingly rewired my brain. One was The City of God by St. Augustine. And it lays out a lot of what...
make a case for this book. If one of our listeners isn't religious, hasn't heard the name St. Augustine, why should they read this book?
Sure. Oh, yeah, I use the Protestant pronunciation, St. Augustine. Okay, here's my pitch. The greatest civilization yet known to man, Rome, the Roman Empire, which caused peace and safety and prosperity for a massive amount of people, all this arts and culture and all these things. The world for so many people was the Roman Empire, and it's falling apart. It's being invaded. People who were safe for centuries and thought that their empire was entirely indestructible, undefeatable, is watching it break apart. Rome is being sacked. Like, huge cities are on fire, right? There's rape and murder everywhere. And this is a time where people are in absolute crisis. And they come to one of the greatest theologians of all time and say, St. Augustine, the world is on fire. The darkness is winning. The pagan hordes are coming. Why? Tell us why this is happening. Because there's a lot of voices saying, well, we were really awesome when we were just like following a lot of the pagan stuff, when we were just like Stoics, and this Christianity came in, and now this is going wrong. Was that it? Is that the right historical, theological, political story or not? And Augustine says, all right, guys, I'll take on the task. And he begins writing. And then he keeps writing. Then he keeps writing. Then one of his friends says, dude, seriously? You've been writing forever and we still haven't gotten an answer. And he's like, give me time. So they say, we got this really cool guy here. You've been writing way too much in the history, starting from freaking Adam. He's going to finish that book for you, okay? So can you get on to the answer? And he says, fine. So that guy takes over. And then he gets into the meat of the book, which starts, I think, at like book 22 of the City of God. And he gives us an answer about how we have dysfunction in the world, how we have political dysfunction in the world, what the answer to this is, how this connects us with theology and philosophy, and how we should view catastrophe and what it would look like to have a strong society.
Wow.
That rewired my brain. He pulls extensively from like the Platonic schools, which I very much like, which Aristotle, I'd say, is inside of that camp. So that's one that rewired my brain and is great.
Just on that note, just briefly before you go to the second one, I had the great joy of getting to do a graduate seminar. I was an undergraduate, but I just forced my way into this graduate seminar on the City of God with one of the world's experts on Augustine at school, at my school. So I got to sit and listen to these grad students debate every chapter of the City of God.
Wow.
If you were interested in it, I would love to have host a conversation between you and my old professor on the City of God and just let you guys go to town on this amazing book.
Oh, that would be so cool. I got to brush up on it. It's been years since I've read it.
Oh, how fun. Well, before you go on to the second book, just tell us briefly, how did it rewire your brain? How did City of God rewire your brain?
My brain because, oh goodness. I guess at that point I had, this is like, oh goodness, like late high school or something, that somehow I ended up picking this up. I had never encountered really any philosophy. And this, even though it's not a book of philosophy, it has a lot of philosophy in it. And that completely blindsided me, that total mode of thinking. The other way is you always need a paradigm, particularly at that time of life. You need like some type of paradigm to fit facts. And there's a lot of like totalizing worldviews that you can take. You can take one that's very simplistic, like oppressor and oppressed. You could take one that's, I don't know, just coercion versus cooperation. You could take all these little paradigms, but he really blows that up into a series of books which say, here's how you set all of the possibilities and facts of life in this giant struggle between these two cities, the City of God and the City of Man, whereby if we say no to, if we say yes to God, to the contempt of self, we're like stretching up infinitely high. And if we say no to God, who is the highest good and the truest truth, if we say no to that and yes to self, it's like we're like snapped back down and like collapse in on ourselves. It's like a black hole. And it just sucks everything into this giant self-destructive spiral. Wow. And this can happen to us, and this can happen to society. And these are the two poles, stretching out with the help of divine grace to God himself, or turning against that towards oneself, snapping back down to earth and self-destruction. He sees these as the two poles. These as like these two competing cities. Now, it's
what I love about that, it's never simple with a great book, but what I love about that is that we can just see it happening in history. I mean, this is Hitler's Germany, this is Stalin's Russia, that collapse of the whole world into the self. It's self-destructive, ultimately. So I can hear, this is so fun, I can hear the Augustinian themes that you just laid out echoing throughout our conversation so far. Your rejection of envy as a fundamentally incorrect way of ordering politics is very rooted in that great book. What was the other book you wanted to share just briefly, and then we'll close?
Sure. I guess the other one was one that I read at around the same time. That was Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. And
There
that
you
one
go.
rewired my brain, giving me that kind of economic way of thinking. Now, it's pretty early economics, and there's certain things which he was missing or got developed by thinkers
Sure.
later, but you'd be amazed at how much is there already. So
Mm,
that really helped me understand a lot of the way the system worked. So kind of looking at
gotcha.
the economic system, that kind of gave me the model to put different things that I found. So that's the other one that rewired my brain.
Oh, that's so fun. Well, thank you so much, Jake, for coming on the channel. I look forward to having you back again not too long from now. This has just been such a wonderful conversation. Anyone
Sounds
who
great.
enjoyed the conversation, if you want to come behind the paywall, there'll be a link in the description. We'll be talking for a little bit more about how Mr. Buscher has found some modicum of happiness in his life and how you might find that same happiness in your own hidden center. Thank you very much for your time and attention.